You may remember a short while ago that we had a look at some gnomes in the woods, and today we're going to have a look at their arch nemesis, the goblins. Well, not these goblins, but these goblins. However, I very much wanted goblins in... I mean, you've got to... Let's start from the beginning. You've got to have goblins in a fantasy setting, right? It's almost a given. If you've got a fantasy world, there's got to be goblins of some kind. And goblins are a very classic British thing in folklore. You'll find mentions of them all through, Dark Ages through to the Middle Ages, through to the Victorian period, through to now. Lots and lots of references to goblins. So they're a very necessary thing to have, a very appropriate thing to have in the setting. But I didn't want to do goblins in the sort of, Games Workshop goblin, green goblin sense of things. I wanted goblins to be more in their older English context, which means sort of a whole wealth of mischievous sprites and spirits. I was reading a very good book last year about goblins in Welsh mythology, and that included ghosts and mine spirits and fairies and anything which was specifically malicious in its intent. That seemed to be the sort of overriding definition of all of these things. It didn't matter what sort of precise anatomical structure. There were big ones and small ones and invisible ones and ghostly ones and real world tangible physical ones and ones from other dimensions. But what ties them together is their sort of mischievous maliciousness towards humans particularly. And so I wanted to do that with the goblins and say goblins are not a particular creature. They're not green skinned, short necessarily, pointy ears. They are a whole wealth of different things. So goblins in the woods denote a former slave caste, or a former slave race, I should say, maybe. Not even that, because I just said they're not one specific race. A former slave peoples who were gathered to do mining for the Fey Empire, and they were brought from all over the place. So they're all very disparate and myriad and strange looking. And the thing that I wanted to get across was very much goblins as they are in the Labyrinth, which is one of my favourite. You'll know that Brian Froud is a big influence on me, and just the myriad of goblins. This is the little goblin companion for the Labyrinth, if you weren't aware, with text by the amazing Terry Jones, very amusing text. But all of these goblins are very different looking, but they have an overall sort of wild rabble, fun-loving but mischievous kind of rabble look, and that's what I was going for with goblins in the woods, which is why you have classifications by sort of size. You've got the little bogles, who are diminutive goblins. You've got the stalu, who are the sort of bigger muscled. They were formerly called hobgoblins to denote that they were big goblins, and now hobgoblins are a separate thing that sort of branched off as a development of the game in the last few years. So the stalu, the red caps, are the sort of more vicious kind of human-sized goblins, and then you've got the jitnir, who are the big kind of troll-sized but still classified as goblins because they've filled that sort of slave role. And what denotes the goblins is that they have rebelled after the Fae left. They said, "We are not mining anymore. We're not doing this for you anymore. We're going to form our own people for our own good, and we're going to take the fight to the Fae." So that's their stance in the world. They're very much trying to form an army and go stomping to Anwin, which is where the Fae live now, and give them a taste of their own medicine. But the goblins are pretty inept, and they don't know how to go through the void to Anwin, so they're just ranting and railing at anybody who gets in their way, basically. And most of the time that's the gnomes, because the gnomes live in the administrative capital, which is above where most of the mines are. Most of the mines are in the base of Mount Silent, which is where the goblins live. And at the moment they're kind of maintaining, after the Goblinomic Wars came to an end, they're maintaining a bit of an easy an uneasy, I should say, truce. But the new exciting project that I'm working on at the moment, working quite hard on at the moment, which I'll be teasing over the next few months, and should be coming out late this year or early next year, is going to be looking at the Goblinomic Wars in the halls of Mount Silence. So there's a bit of a taste of that. But anyway, back to goblins. So goblins are an unruly mob. They're set on revenge, but they don't really know how to get it or how to go about it. And they're a mixture of various different types. So how do you stat that in the game? Well, that's why I've put it on these three different levels. So let's look at Goblin warbands. Goblin warbands are probably one of my favourites, partly for the modelling possibilities, partly for the sculpts that we already have, thanks to Martin Long. When I saw him put those up on the original Sculpts for Sale page, I just had to nab them. And actually last year I paid him for some more, and that was about 9 months, and they were almost done at that point, and they haven't turned up yet. So I keep nagging him, but nag him for me. Martin, send me these figures. I need to be moulding them and getting them into production. Anyway, so I knew I had to have those for the range, but I did want to do, at some point, I want to do some of my own as well, because labyrinth goblins, I just love labyrinth goblins. They're my favourite. Anyway, I'm rambling. Sorry, I'm rambling. Let's get back to the meat of the issue. How do you play a goblin warband? So, goblins do not have a very strong base stat line. Wisdom of 1, perception of 1. They're not very bright. They're not very observant. Strength of 1. They're not very strong. Their agility is average. What makes up for that is their courage of 3. They are insanely brave. Well, I mean, they're only a point above average, but that's a regular troop. They are characterised by being foolhardily brave, despite not being very good at other things, and also by having an endurance of 8. So they've got quite a high endurance rate, which in the fluff is because they've got this kind of rubbery, bouncy skin. Part of the reason they can be so foolhardily brave is that actually it's very hard to hurt a goblin. Blows bounce off them. They just sort of shrug off pain most of the time. They're not worried about that. That kind of goes with their kind of crazy madcap nature. When you get your leader, they come as standard with an extra point of courage. So you're already average in your decisiveness, and above average you've got 8 points in your stamina as a leader. But then you've got quite a lot of flexibility. You can add to your wisdom if you want them to be cleverer. You can add to their strength if you want them to be strongerer. But doing so takes up quite a lot of your points. So you either settle for a very mediocre leader and have a goblin horde following them, or you go for a bigger war chief leader and you have a more concentrated but capable troop following them. And that was very much kind of how I wanted them to run, with particularly in mind that you could have a hogboggler. Sorry, not a hogboggler. They didn't exist at the time. They do now. A hogboggler, a goblin riding on a hogboggle, as it were. You could have the boggler Khan, the chief of the goblins, the Goblin King, who is a temporary position, and they get deposed quite often because they're not particularly good. They just happen to be who's flavour of the month at the moment. You can put them in charge and have a horde of bogles following them, perhaps with a big jitner because they need a cave troll, maybe. Or you could boost your leader up to make him a more competent sort of Stalu war chief. And then have a crack team of Stali behind him and have this sort of fighting elite mob kind of look. That was the idea anyway, that you could go in either of those two directions quite easily. Your troops are pretty cheap if you're taking bogles, but bogles have that base stat line, so they do have 6 points of stamina, so you can get a run in with them. and with a dexterity of 5, they're quite fast. So you can walk for 5 or you can sprint for 8 because you're limited by your agility still. But it means that they're quite nippy little buggers. But if you get into a fight, they're limited by their strength of 1, so they're not ever going to be able to put a big grapple score on. However, they have some good ways of abrading their enemy's grapple score, which we'll deal with in a little while. So they're the cheap bog standard troops, and if you want to, you can add the diminutive skill to them, which makes them even harder to hit in combat. We'll deal with goblins in combat in a moment. Your other options are the Stalu, who are more expensive. If you don't take base points, you're only going to get 4 of those in a warband, so it's going to be a much more concise warband, but with a strength of 3, so not even just up 1 point on the strength, up 2 points on the strength. So these are suddenly very big, powerful troops. They're going to be winning fights, and with an endurance of 8, even if you do manage to somehow sneak a victory in a round of combat, it's going to take an awful lot to put them down. So they're quite nasty, and they come with glaives as standard. And not only do they come with glaives as standard, which gives them reach and a high impact hit, they've also come with polecraft as standard, which means that they don't even suffer off balance conditions when they're waving these big heavy things around, because they know what they're doing. They're trained warrior units. So it is it's difficult to take on Stalu in a fight for definite. Then there are the Jitnir, and the Jitnir are more expensive still, but you could still take 3 if you were really determined to take 3 in an unmodified warband. You could do so. They have a strength of 5, only an agility of 1, so they're moving a maximum of 4 inches per turn, and they're awkward, so they have to move in straight lines. They can't weave around obstacles, so it's actually quite easy to keep out of their way as they're blundering around. But if they do manage to catch you, they're pretty nasty, and they're definitely not an easy target to pick on unless you're going to really mob them down, because of course that 5 strength, not only does it mean that they've got a base finesse of 6 and a maximum grapple score of 20, 25, 5 times. I should learn my own rules, really, shouldn't I? Base grapple score, maximum grapple score of 25, but that's also adding to their stamina at the same time, so it's a kind of double hit. So they've got a stamina of 9, which means they theoretically can do 3 walk actions, even though they can't because they're limited by their agility. That still means they're going to have an awful lot of stamina to add to their finesse for any fight that does happen. So they are absolute tanks, and it's very difficult to get them down, again, with their endurance of 8. So every hit that you're doing is taking much less damage than it would on a regular troop. And then there are the Noaidi, the shamanic seer type goblins, who have augur, and they have a wisdom of 4. So they're the way magic works, if you're not familiar in the woods, or magic fate weaving is kind of magic, different sort of magic. You reduce the cost of, it's all done on an action basis still, so casting a fate weaving action, fate weaving power, costs you stamina in the regular way as do all of the other actions, but you reduce it by a stat. So if you're a geomancer, you're concentrating on the ritual, so you reduce it by your wisdom. If you're an augur, you reduce it by your perception. So the wisdom of the Noaidi doesn't actually impact their ability to cast spells very much. Their perception of 2 is what's doing that. So they're not particularly potent spellcasters, but the wisdom boosts up their decisiveness quite considerably, and also their presence. So they have a presence of 6 with their strength bonus because they're Stalu. So you've got quite a good command range. So even though they're sort of all right magic users, as it were, they're actually better as commanders, ordering the troops around. So let's talk about what goblins are good at. Goblins are good at fighting things. Is that true? Stalu, we've already mentioned, and Jitnir, we've already mentioned, are good at fighting things. Bogles, are they good at fighting things with their strength of 1? One of my favourite games that I ever played was at Bootleg Ball, the year that Bring Out Your Lead wasn't on because of COVID. We did a small old hammer, a get together somewhere in the Midlands, and I played a game with Richard, Irvin, and Jerome, and we played. I was Fey Walkers, and he was Mieri, I think, and Jerome was playing Goblins, and the Fey Walkers and the Mieri were really having at each other. There was a proper fight going on, and the Goblins were just popping up every now and again and like sticking a boot in and tripping people over and then running off with stuff. And that was absolutely, to my mind, the perfect way of playing Goblins. It was one of my favourite games, and the Goblins won hands down because they didn't get involved too much in the fights. They were hiding and running around and then kicking people up the bum, and I just thought that was absolutely the right way to be playing those Goblins. It worked a treat. So Goblins, because you are limited, or severely limited on your finesse, they're going to bounce off a lot of people. But what Goblins do very well is mob people and just sit there and take damage. So what they're really good at is, while they might not be winning a combat, they can sit in that combat for ages because of Goblin armor, which we'll talk about in a minute, and because of their high endurance rate, and because you will get quite a few of them in a warband. If you can get 4 or 5 Bogles around one enemy, it's going to be going down pretty quickly, because after the first one, or possibly the second one, certainly by the third Goblin that gets in, there'll be some wide spacing going on, so that will eat down your opponent's grapple score. They won't have any stamina left to fight with, probably. So a combination of being wide spaced and exhausted is just going to wear an opponent down, and then hitting with a regular is a stone axe weapon, so it's an impact 3 weapon, but you're only going to need to land 2 good blows in order to take somebody down, or take 6 tiny blows will also do it. So and this is where the other skills that the Goblin have really come in handy, because they're berserkers. So if they initiate a fight with a sprint, the added impetus, and they manage to do some damage, the added impetus adds damage to their hit, so they get +2 to their damage for being able to charge into that attack. So, excuse me, after the first Goblin has gone in and probably not done very much, if your second and third Goblins are sprinting in unchallenged into that grapple, into that fight, and hitting, if they're hitting with their stone axe for 3 damage, but they've sprinted in, they're hitting for 5 damage, it's only going to take 2 blows, definitely, to take out most troops on the battlefield. There's not much that hitting with 10 damage in 2 strikes is going to leave standing. So if you're able to mob somebody, then they can go down pretty fast. They're also diminutive, which I mentioned earlier, or they can be if you add to the points for them. And when you're diminutive, you can slip under the legs of an opponent and wide space them from behind in the next round. And that can be very, very handy if you are trying to get hit, in, or trying to allow for more Goblins to come into the combat. So that is helpful for them as well. Now, it does. The Berserker is an innate skill. It's in the Goblin base profile, so that also means that the Jitnir and the Stalu also have that trait. So I think, let me have a look at the Stalu's glaive. In the back of my head, it's an impact 5 weapon because of the really heavy head. It's an impact 6 weapon. There you go. It's huge. It's an impact 6 weapon. So it's already a kill, or not a kill, but a knocking unconscious if it hits most people. That would be an impact 8 with a charge. which makes being knocked down by a Stalu pretty easy rather. So they are nasty things. So you can have two very different looking goblin warbands, and most that I've seen tend to go one way or the other. They tend to be mob bands with lots of bogles in, or they tend to be very focused fighty warbands with a couple of Stalu, maybe a Jitnir, but the Jitnir is usually a backup option because of how slow they are. They're not very easy to get into a combat. You could have a no ID next to them and move them around, but I think that for the most part, a Jitnir's use is outweighed by its inability to get anywhere very fast on the battlefield. So I tend to see two types. I tend to see the sort of low numbers of very nasty warriors with the Stalu, or the big numbers of not so nasty but just impossible to get rid of bogles en masse. So let's have a look at, first of all, let's have a look at goblin armour, because I have mentioned goblin armour. Most of the goblins in the field companion are wearing armour of some description or another, and so I wanted to have goblins in armour as well. And the background on goblin armour is that the kobolds, who were the artisans who made all the nice stuff for the Fae and then got left behind when the Fae left, they were working with the gnomes initially, but then the gnomes were so busy with the administration, they were trying to force the kobolds to go and do the manual mining work, and the kobolds said, no, we're artisans, we don't do manual labour. So they defected and went downstairs to the goblins and joined the goblin cause. And they're busy making armour and arms for the goblin assault on Anwin, which is coming whenever it comes. But the goblins aren't particularly good at design, and they've basically left the kobolds to get on with it. And the kobolds are making all these lovely, ornate, beautiful works of art, suits of armour, that are completely impractical, and they have various effects which can be positive or can be negative. So when you have your goblins, they come with goblin armour as standard, and if you have a kobold in your warband, you can get them to refashion the goblin armour in between games. They love sort of tinkering with that. And this is a chance thing, so this is a dice roll or a cast the runes if you prefer to cast the runes. Each set of goblin armour will have 3 of the 6 traits, so either it will have soft lining, which gives it absorb 1. It will have a combination of 3 of these things, and you can't have the same thing more than once, so you will have 3 out of these 6 things. So it's either absorb 1, expertly shaped plates give it absorb 4, so that's a good thing. Ingenious compartments count as belters and pack, means you can carry more stuff. A spectacular but impractical helm reduces perception by 1, bearing in mind that you can only reduce perception to a stat to a minimum of 1 anyway. So for most goblins, that's not a big problem. It's only really a problem if you're trying to boost the stats of your goblin, or if you give it to your no ID. So that's sort of a not really a problem in most cases. It could be extremely ornamental and reduce agility by 1, and bearing in mind that being fast is one of the things that gives goblins an edge. That could be a bit of a difficulty, reducing their capacity of a 5-inch move, an 8-inch sprint, to a 4-inch move in total, because it'd be the same as a 4-inch move in total, is a big deal. Or a terrifying mask, which gives them +2 menace, good for intimidation, but renders them mute and unable to hear orders, so they can't give or receive orders. They can just stand around and look intimidating. So you'll have 3 of those things, so it's a very good bet that you will have something negative added to your goblin for the benefits that it confers, and there's a fairly good possibility that you'll have 3 really bad things on your goblins, but that's the nature of taking goblins. So that's goblin armour. It can be a blessing, can be a curse. So let's now have a look at the at the objectives and see what objectives goblins are good at and what objectives goblins are not good at. Revenge is a really good one for for both types of goblin warband, actually, for a Stally warband or a bogle mob, because the mob can focus entirely on one model, and the Stally don't need to focus particularly. They're pretty nasty anyway. So yeah, revenge is a good one. It's probably a bit easier to do with a Stally warband than it is to do with a bogle warband, because it's going to involve putting all your bogles in one basket, which may be what you want to do because that's your objective, but it's going to be easier for your opponent to dodge out of the way, keep that one character safe when it becomes obvious who the bogles are going after. Steel, which I think is what Jerome was playing, is a good one for bogles because they are pretty nippy. So that's a good one. Observe is not because of the low perception. Counting coup is okay if you're playing with Stalu, because you're going to be able to win, and having a ranged weapon is going to mean that you can get away quicker. It's going to be harder to do that with bogles, although their agility is going to make breaking off from combat and running away a bit easier. Defile is Defile and Totem, and to an extent Escape are reasonable ones to do because of the speed at which you're moving. You're slightly faster than most regular troops, and you can move and keep a little bit of stamina back for doing other stuff as well. So they're fairly good things to be doing. Guardians, I remember trying to fight a Guardians battle with a Chitnir, just sitting the Chitnir in the middle of the ring, trying to keep other people out. Yeah, it depends what you're facing, whether Guardians is going to be a good thing. Horde is going to be another good thing because you've got the speed and the extra. So they're pretty good all-rounder warband. If you're taking Stally, they're going to really excel at inflicting violence on others. If you are playing bogles, then their ability to just soak loads of damage is going to be really easy. So if you were to play Guardians, for example, and just stick all your bogles in a ring on the alert around wherever you're trying to keep people out of, bearing in mind that they're already quite fast, so they're going to get there quicker than most other troops can get there. If you can make a ring around that area, which, let's see, it's a 3-inch diameter, 3-inch radius area, so you should be able to ring that pretty effectively with 10 or so bogles, and they're just going to sit there because people are going to be splitting the damage across all of them. So unless they can find a way to break that ring, nobody's getting in there. So they're particularly good at that. Stally will be less good at that because you won't have enough models to form that ring. But they're generally pretty good, generally pretty effective. And then, of course, as with the gnomes, it's cheap to upgrade a gnome from 1 agility to 2 agility. It's cheap to upgrade a bogle from 1 strength to 2 strength. So their sort of innate poor grapple score is negated pretty quickly once you start getting into a campaign. So what do you do? What do you do about goblins? This is a thing that the gnomes, of course, have been struggling with for a very long time. What do you do about the goblin problem? Their solution is to keep handing it off to be the responsibility of one of the different guilds at a time. The honest answer is that it depends what the goblins are trying to do. So in that situation where you've got a ring of goblins and they're protecting an area, trying to get bogles down to 0 endurance, particularly if they've got goblin armor that can be abraded, that's 12 points you're going to need to take them out. Or they've got an absorb, so for every 3 points, say, you're doing on them, they're soaking 1 of those, so you've got 2 points going through. It's going to take you 4 hits to get them down. It's a long process trying to get goblins on the ground that way. The best thing that you can do is run their stamina down. So at every possible opportunity, keeping out of the way of them, be lobbing rocks at them, be shouting at them, be intimidating them, be forcing them to use up their stamina, so that they will eventually fall over, and then you can do something about it. They've all got a very low decisiveness, so they're going to be going probably at the end of most turns, after everybody else has gone. So the likelihood is that you will get most of your warband actions in before the goblins then act all at the end. So that is a weakness, that they don't generally have that sort of staggered decisiveness, which means that you get to sort of react at different points during the turn. It's going to be everybody else does something and then the goblins have a go at doing something. So if you can get their stamina down, you're going to have lots of other opportunities to go past them if they're on the floor. That's a good way of trying to take them out. Generally, try and stay out of their way, which is easy with the Jitnir, much harder with Stalu, but they're going to be limited on the numbers. And if you can identify that they're going after one particular model, or they're going after one particular area, you can either concentrate your forces on that area, or you can move them to try and get out of the way, or shield that one model. It's sometimes a good idea to throw other models under the bus at Stalu to protect the one model if they're trying to get victory points off that. The difficulty, obviously, is that if you're being charged by a Stalu with a glaive, if it's doing 8 points of damage in one hit, and you're playing a campaign, the chances in an injury table of not sustaining a really serious injury with that model are pretty low. So you're going to want to try and can't speak. You want to try and moderate the damage somewhat. So don't let Stalu charge at you. Try and get up close with them before they can break at you. It's better to engage them than it is for them to engage you. Remember that with pole weapons, if you're within their reach, then they're at a disadvantage. So while they might be really powerful at their reach with their glaives, if you're able to win a round of combat and duck under that, then they're vulnerable. And also their low perception means that you can be in quite close behind them and still creep in and preserve a lot of stamina, so you can attack them from behind while they're busy fighting somebody else. So ganging up on Stalu, and ganging up in fights is always a good idea if you can, but ganging up on Stalu particularly is a good idea. You might not be able to do it on Bogles, but with Bogles, if you are in a group anyway, sticking together is a good way of diluting that horde, because Bogles are dependent upon getting lots of models around a single model in order to cause it damage. So if you can group your models together so that the Bogles can't mob a single model, then that's a good thing to do. So I hope that's given you some thought, some ideas for how to fight with and without. With and against, that's what I mean, with and against goblins. Yeah, let us know how you get on, and if you've got any ideas. There are a few people asking for clarifications and throwing some more ideas about gnomes in the last video, both in the comments section and on our Facebook group. So if you have any comments, the best place to discuss them is probably, we can do it in the comments below here, but the best place is probably if you pop on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, go to the Woods Worldwide Players Circle. We can have a proper discussion on there. That's all for now. Take care, and I shall see you again.